Thank you for having me here today. It's been, about a month since August 26, 1920. And so it's early enough that I think we can all just take a moment to give a big cheer. We American women have the vote. Hip, hip, hooray! Well, I have been at this for 48 years. It all began back in 1848, actually, when Elizabeth Cady Stanton had a women's right convention up in Seneca Falls, New York. I'd never heard of it, but by the time I was 13, my parents were working for the campaign of Horace Greeley. And my mother worked very hard. My father did, and the field hand. And one night, my father and the field hand got up and started out the door. I said, "Oh, where are you going?" They said, "To vote." And I said, "Well, Mother, aren't you going?" And they all started smiling. And my father said, "Well, Carrie Clinton Lane, don't you know? Women can't vote." I was shocked. I have to tell you, I was shocked. I was only 13 years old, but my innate sense of justice was offended. And now here I am today, a white-haired old lady of 61, telling you that after that time, I spent 48 years of my life working toward that success. As I grew, I went to school, did well. Eventually, because I lived in Iowa, I was born in Wisconsin, but I lived in Iowa, I decided I wanted to go to the Iowa Agricultural College. It was new at the time. And I told my father I was interested. He said, "I'm surprised to hear you say that, Carrie Clinton Lane. Don't you think you should just marry and support your husband, work on the farm, and have a family?" Let me share with you, that was not my vision of what I wanted to do. But he said, I won't pay for it. And I thought, well, fine, I'll figure out a way to do it. And I worked my way through college. I did housekeeping. I worked in the library at school. Those kinds of things that really contributed. And finally, I did well enough that Father said to me, "Well, I guess I can give you $25 toward your education." It was kind of him, but, basically I did it myself. While I was in college, a couple of interesting things happened. I went to school and passed by the big field where I'd always see the male students out there doing military exercises. And when I asked about it, I was told, well, they needed to form discipline and to get good exercise. So I went to the fellow who started the program and I said, "I really would like to emphasize that I think women students also would like to achieve some sense of discipline and get good exercise." He looked at me and he said, "Good idea," and started Company G, which stood for girls. Then I joined the Literary Society and was informed that although I could write my own essays, it would be my job to pick out the right, bright young man to read my essay in front of the society when it was time for a presentation. Well, the topic of women's rights came up, and I said, I appreciate the fact that you would do that for me, but I want to give my own talk. think I surprised them because everybody just said, well, all right. And I did give my talk, and they changed the policy at the college from that point forward. Imagine how excited I was. I graduated at the top of my class and was a valedictorian. Went on to get a job as a teacher in Mason City, Iowa. I liked teaching. My students liked me. And when I'd been working for a while, it turned out the principal of the school decided to leave. And a couple of my students came and said, Miss Lane, we think you would be a good principal. I thought they were right. I applied, and I got the job. So it occurred to me after a certain point that I wasn't only the principal. The principal was also the superintendent of schools in Charles City. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll get a chance to show what I can do eventually, because I thought I had potential. I wanted my students to do well, and I took some of their writing down to the local newspaper. It was the Mason City Republican, and the publisher, whose name was Leo Chapman, published them, and it became a big hit. And their essays were not the only hit. Leo and I hit it off, and before I knew it, we were engaged to be married. And it was a happy marriage, I must say. But when the chance came to run for a higher office, even beyond superintendent of schools in Mason City, I wanted to become superintendent of schools for the entire county, and ran against a fellow who turned out to have been involved in a scam. Leo published that information, and my opponent won. He sued Leo, and we lost the newspaper. Leo had to go and find another job. Went out to San Francisco. He was gone but a couple of days when I got a message that he had contracted typhoid fever. And by the time I got out to San Francisco, my husband died. There I was, in a place I knew little about. I was in grief. I had no work. And finally, I got a job. I was the first female journalist for a newspaper in San Francisco. Of course, I wasn't simply a journalist. I did administrative work, I sold ads, I'd work late into the night, and one evening I was at my desk when the man I worked for came in, and he grabbed me and started kissing me. Well, I fought him off. But when he left, I just felt dirty and decided that I was going to do something about this. There should be protections for women in situations like this, but there was not. And because I tend to be a top-down thinker, I decided that what I was going to do to get those protections was get the vote for women. That equaled political power, because we didn't have it. I got involved in the Iowa Woman Suffrage Association. I started some political suffrage groups, clubs, and was really, really enjoying the work. I was quite inspired by Lucy Stone, a major suffragist, and thought maybe I could even go further, but for the time I was doing that. But one day, I was walking down the street in San Francisco, and I heard a voice call out to me, Carrie Lane. Well, it was George Catt. He was one of the fellow students when I went to college. We had a chat, and I said, we really ought to keep in touch, George. This is so nice seeing you. He said, oh, I think so too. Well, we did. And pretty soon I got the feeling that George Catt didn't just have friendship in mind. But I'd made some decisions about what it was I wanted to do with my life at this point. And really, marriage was not a part of it. I decided I wanted to do what I could to help women get the vote. You can't really be married and have a family and do that kind of work, can you? Oh, maybe some people can, but I didn't feel I could. So I told George, I'm going off on a new career. I'm going to give lectures because I think that would help me in the work that I want to do. I came up with 3 speeches that I was going to give, and I got myself an agent. This did not bring in very much money, unfortunately, and so I had a hard time paying my rent. But at one point, I went to a convention and met some people who were in the suffrage effort. And somehow I got myself a position where I could give a very short speech at the major convention, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Oh, how I prepared for that. I wanted to do well. Now, I don't know if you know very much about the women's suffrage movement, but after Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony got together back there in the 1848 to 1850s, they started the National Women's Suffrage Association. And immediately there started to be problems. The group split. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony started the National Women's Suffrage Association after Lucy Stone and her husband started the American Women's Suffrage Association. The American Women's Suffrage group felt that getting the vote for African American men should be a first effort and lead to women getting the vote. The National Women's Suffrage Association believed that women wanted to go after the vote through federal amendment and were going to put themselves out there at every possible opportunity. This went on for a long, long time. They didn't put their disagreements aside for over 15 years. But that's the way these things go. And so I gave my speech at the National American Women's Suffrage Association convention, and apparently I impressed somebody. They invited me to get involved. I took a job in the organizational committee head, where it was my job not only to find speakers and to get out there and make sure that the speeches went well, and also I was expected to raise money. So enjoyed doing that, and at one point Susan B. Anthony, who is now president of the organization, told me that she was going to the next convention and wanted me to head along with her. I said, oh, what an honor. She said, yes, indeed, and we're going to be stopping along the way. This is the first time we're doing it in Atlanta, but we're going to hit Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, and Kentucky along the way. Susan B. Anthony was an amazing individual, but she had her ways. We would go into a place where she was giving a talk. It might be a church, it might be some sort of a club, who knows. But she would start out talking about the vote and women, and she would start berating the men as though it were their fault, as though they might not be there to support us. And then she would finish up and she would sit down and look at me. It became my job to then stand up and say, "We are very happy, gentlemen, that you are here today, because you wouldn't be here unless you thought that women having the vote could matter. And thank you for coming. And ladies," and then I would go on. Well, it gave me the ability to be fast on my feet, I have to tell you that. I learned a lot from touring with Susan B. Anthony.